He woke up with a woman he'd never met sleeping in his dead wife's side of the bed. Before he could process what happened, he found a pregnancy test hidden in his wife's drawer, dated 3 weeks after her funeral, and then his phone lit up with a message. Keep your daughter close, you don't know who's watching. This is the story of Ethan Cole, a single father who stumbled into a web of corruption, blackmail, and betrayal so deep it nearly destroyed everything he had left. Stay with me until the end. If this story reaches you, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments, so I can see just how far this journey travels. The alarm didn't go off. That was the first wrong thing. Though Ethan Cole wouldn't understand for hours just how many wrong things had already stacked themselves neatly around his life, like dominoes waiting for a breath of wind. He opened his eyes at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in November, 17 minutes past the time he normally dragged himself out of bed to start the coffee, set out Lily's cereal bowl, and iron whatever shirt didn't have yesterday's stain on it. The ceiling fan above him rotated in lazy, uneven circles. One of the blades had a slight wobble he kept meaning to fix. He'd been meaning to fix it for 2 years now, ever since Claire died, and somehow it kept falling off the list behind things like keeping a 6-year-old fed and making sure the electric bill got paid on time. He rubbed his face with both hands and turned his head to the left. There was a woman in his bed. Not Claire. Claire had been dead for 14 months. Claire's pillow still sat on the left side because Ethan hadn't been able to bring himself to move it, and now someone else's dark hair was fanned across it, and someone else's arm was tucked beneath it, and someone else was breathing the slow, deep rhythm of heavy sleep in a bed that hadn't held another person since the night before his wife's accident. Ethan sat up so fast the room tilted. He didn't scream. He didn't make a sound. Some deep fatherly instinct clamped down on his vocal cords because Lily was asleep down the hall, and whatever this was, whoever this was, the last thing he needed was his daughter walking in to find a stranger in her dead mother's place. The woman was fully clothed, black blazer, wrinkled at the elbows, gray silk blouse. One heel still on, the other kicked off and lying on its side near the nightstand like a small, expensive casualty. Her makeup was smudged beneath her eyes in dark crescents, and her lipstick had transferred onto Claire's pillowcase in a faint red smear that made Ethan's stomach turn for reasons he couldn't fully name. He was also fully clothed, jeans, the flannel shirt he'd put on yesterday morning. His work boots were still on his feet, which meant he'd somehow fallen asleep without even untying them, which had never happened. Not once. Not even during the worst weeks after Claire's death when he'd barely been functional enough to shower. His head felt thick, not hungover. He knew what hangovers felt like, and this was different. This was more like waking up after anesthesia, that slow, dragging sensation of swimming up through layers of fog that didn't want to let him go. What the hell happened last night? He tried to reconstruct it. He'd picked Lily up from after-school care at 5:15. They'd stopped at the grocery store. He'd made her spaghetti with the jarred sauce she liked, the one with the little chunks of tomato she called the bumpy kind. She'd watched 20 minutes of a cartoon about a dog who solved mysteries. He'd given her a bath, read her 2 chapters of a book about a magic treehouse, tucked her in at 8 o'clock. Then, nothing. The entire evening after 8 p.m. was gone. Not fuzzy, not vague, just absent, like someone had reached into his skull and cleanly removed 6 hours of memory the way you'd pull a drawer from a dresser. Ethan stood up slowly, keeping his eyes on the woman. She hadn't moved. Her breathing was steady. Whoever she was deeply asleep, and something about the heaviness of that sleep felt wrong to him. It was too deep, too still, like she wasn't just resting, she was under. He backed out of the bedroom without making a sound, pulled the door mostly closed, and stood in the hallway with his hand on the wall and his heart hammering against the base of his throat. Lily's door was open 3 inches, exactly the way she liked it. He pushed it wider and looked in. She was curled in her bed with the purple comforter pulled up to her chin, one arm wrapped around the stuffed penguin she'd named Waddles. Her mouth slightly open the way it always was when she slept. She was fine. She was safe. Ethan let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in his chest for 10 years. He went to the kitchen. The spaghetti pot was still in the sink, half filled with water that had gone cold and murky. 2 plates on the counter, one large, one small, exactly as he would have left them after dinner. The front door was locked. The chain was on. The kitchen window over the sink was closed and latched. Everything was exactly as it should be, except for the woman sleeping in his bed, who he had never seen before in his life. Ethan poured himself a glass of water and drank it standing at the counter, gripping the edge with his free hand. His thoughts kept sliding around like shoes on ice. He needed to think. He needed to be logical about this. People didn't just appear in other people's beds. There was an explanation. There was always an explanation. His phone was on the counter, plugged into the charger. He picked it up. No missed calls. No texts. No clue. He opened his recent calls. The last one was from Mrs. Huang, the elderly woman who lived downstairs and occasionally watched Lily when Ethan's schedule went sideways. That call had been at 4:30 p.m. yesterday. Nothing after that. No ride-sharing app open, no unfamiliar numbers, no thread of digital breadcrumbs leading anywhere useful. He was still standing there, staring at his phone like it might suddenly explain everything, when he heard movement from the bedroom. Not much. Just the soft creak of the mattress, and then a sound that was unmistakably a woman clearing her throat. Ethan set the glass down. He walked back to the bedroom and stopped in the doorway. She was sitting up now, her back against the headboard, her dark hair messy and tangled around her face. She was looking at her own hands as if she had never seen them before, turning them over slowly, flexing her fingers. Then she looked up and saw Ethan, and for a long, terrible moment they just stared at each other. "Who are you?" she said. Her voice was hoarse, scraping out like it hadn't been used in days. "Where am I?" "You're in my apartment," Ethan said. His own voice sounded steadier than he felt. "And I was going to ask you the same question." She blinked, looked around the room. Her eyes moved across the cluttered nightstand. Ethan's reading glasses, a half-empty glass of water, the framed photo of Claire holding a newborn Lily, and then across the dresser, the basket of unfolded laundry on the floor, the closet door that never stayed shut all the way. Something shifted in her expression, not fear exactly, more like the sudden sharp awareness of a situation that had no good explanation. "This is a mistake," she said. "Yeah," Ethan said. "I figured that part out. I need my phone." She patted the bed around her, then her blazer pockets, then leaned over the edge and found a small clutch bag on the floor beside the nightstand. She opened it, pulled out a phone in a black case, and stared at the screen. Whatever she saw made her jaw tighten. 23 missed calls, she said, more to herself than to him. 14 texts. She scrolled for a few seconds. "My head of security has been looking for me since midnight." Ethan processed that sentence. Head of security. People who had personal security teams didn't usually wake up in two-bedroom apartments in a building where the elevator had been broken since March. "I need to know your name," Ethan said, "and then I need to know how you got into my home." She looked at him. Her eyes were dark brown, and even disoriented, even clearly rattled, there was something behind them that was sharp and assessing. She was reading him the way you'd read a balance sheet, quickly, efficiently, looking for the number that didn't add up. "Victoria Sterling," she said. "I'm the CEO of Sterling Dynamics." Ethan knew the name. Not personally. He'd never met anyone from that world. But Sterling Dynamics was one of the biggest infrastructure companies in the region. They built bridges, highways, commercial towers. Their name was on the side of construction sites all over the city. He'd driven past their corporate headquarters dozens of times on his way to job sites. The building was 32 stories of glass and steel, and it always struck him as aggressively clean, the kind of place where people wore suits that cost more than his rent. And the woman who ran it had just woken up in his bed. "Okay," Ethan said slowly. "I'm Ethan Cole. I'm a construction foreman. I have a 6-year-old daughter sleeping down the hall, and I have no idea how you got here." Victoria swung her legs off the bed and stood up. She wavered for a second, the same foggy unsteadiness Ethan had felt, and steadied herself with one hand on the nightstand. "Something is wrong," she said. "Yeah," Ethan said again. You mentioned that." "No, I mean something is wrong with me physically. My head feels like it's been packed with wet cotton. I can't remember anything after 7 o'clock last night. I was at a client dinner at Rosario's on 5th. I had 1 glass of wine. 1. I remember the appetizers coming out, and then nothing." Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. "Same," he said. "I was here with my daughter. I put her to bed at 8, and then it just stops." Their eyes met, and in that brief, ugly moment of shared realization, two people who had nothing in common understood that whatever had happened to them had happened to both of them, and neither of them had chosen it. Victoria looked at the bed, at the pillows, at the way the covers were rumpled but not pulled back, like two people had been placed on top of the comforter rather than under it. Her expression hardened. "We were put here," she said. "Excuse me? Look at this. Neither of us undressed. Neither of us got under the covers. My shoes are still on. One of them, anyway. You're wearing your work boots. This isn't what it looks like when two people go to bed together, Mr. Cole. This is what it looks like when two unconscious people are arranged to look like they did." Ethan stared at her. His brain was catching up now, the fog lifting enough for the implications to start filtering through. Drugged, staged. Someone had drugged them both and brought Victoria Sterling into his apartment and put her in his bed beside him, and the question was so enormous he couldn't get his mouth around it. "Why?" he managed. Victoria's phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at it, and something in her face went completely still. "I need to go," she said. "Now, I need to get out of here before anyone sees me leaving this building." "Hold on, you can't just—" "Mr. Cole," she said his name like a verdict. "If anyone finds out that I spent the night in a stranger's apartment, regardless of the circumstances, the damage to my company will be catastrophic. I don't know who did this or why, but I know what it will look like, and I cannot let that story get out. Do you understand?" Ethan understood. He didn't like it, but he understood. He was already thinking about what it would look like from his side. A widower, a single father, a woman who wasn't his wife in his bed. He thought about the school, about Mrs. Huang downstairs, about the parents at Lily's preschool who already looked at him with that particular mixture of pity and suspicion that single fathers attracted. "Fine," he said. "The back stairs go down to the alley. Nobody uses them." Victoria gathered her things with practiced efficiency. Phone, clutch, the wayward heel, and stopped at the bedroom door. She looked back at him, and for just a second the corporate mask slipped and he saw something underneath it that looked almost human, almost afraid. "If someone did this to us deliberately," she said, "they had a reason, and we need to find out what it is before they use it." Then she was gone. Ethan heard the back door close, and the apartment was quiet again, and he stood in his bedroom looking at the place where a stranger had slept beside him and tried to make the world make sense. It didn't. Not yet. He stripped the bed. He pulled off Claire's pillowcase with the lipstick stain and shoved it to the bottom of the laundry basket. He put on fresh sheets. He worked mechanically, the way he always did when his mind was racing too fast for his body to keep up. Hands doing one thing, brain doing another. He should call the police. He knew that. Someone had broken into his apartment, drugged him, placed an unconscious woman in his bed. That was a crime. Multiple crimes. But even as he thought it, he could hear the questions. "Did you know this woman? Had you been drinking? Are you sure nothing happened?" He could see the way they'd look at him. He could imagine the report. And then he thought about Lily and about a custody system that was already skeptical of single fathers. And he felt the weight of his situation like a physical thing pressing on his shoulders. Not yet. He would figure this out first. He would understand what he was dealing with before he invited anyone else into it. He went through the apartment room by room, kitchen, living room, bathroom. Lily's room, where she was still asleep, still holding waddles, still breathing the uncomplicated breaths of a child who trusted that the world was safe because her father said so. He checked the front door lock again. No scratches, no signs of forced entry. Whoever had gotten in either had a key or had been let in, and neither of those options made any sense. In the bedroom, he opened Claire's nightstand drawer. He hadn't touched it in 14 months. It was one of the last territories of her presence that he'd been unwilling to disturb. Her reading glasses, a tube of hand cream, a paperback novel she'd never finished, a small notebook where she used to write grocery lists in her looping handwriting. He didn't know why he opened it now. Some instinct, maybe. Some feeling that the wrongness that had invaded his home might have roots deeper than one night. Beneath the notebook, tucked against the back of the drawer, he found something that shouldn't have been there. It was a pregnancy test, the kind you bought at a drugstore, in its original box already used. 2 lines in the little window, positive, and written on the side of the box in Claire's handwriting, in blue ink, was a date, November 12th. Ethan sat down on the edge of the bed. Claire had died on October 20th. The date on the box was 23 days later. That was impossible. His wife had been dead for over 3 weeks when someone with her handwriting, had dated this box, which meant either someone was very good at forging Claire's handwriting, or Claire had dated it before her death, and the date itself was aspirational, a future marker, a plan. Either way, the test was positive, and Claire had never told him she was pregnant, and he was sitting in a bed where a stranger had slept beside him, holding proof of a secret his dead wife had carried alone. His hands were shaking. He noticed this distantly, the way you notice the weather when something more important is consuming your attention. He put the test back in the drawer and closed it. He would deal with this. He would deal with all of it. But Lily was going to wake up in 20 minutes, and she was going to want breakfast, and the world was going to require him to function regardless of what was falling apart inside his chest. He made coffee. He poured Lily's cereal. He set out her vitamins. And when she padded into the kitchen at 7:15 with her hair tangled and wattles dangling from one hand, he smiled at her and said, "Morning, Bug," in a voice that was almost normal. "Morning, Daddy." She climbed into her chair with the booster seat and picked up her spoon. "I had a dream about penguins." "Yeah? What were they doing?" "Swimming, and then one of them flew, but penguins can't fly, so it was silly." "Very silly," Ethan agreed. He watched her eat, this small, perfect person who had Claire's nose and his stubborn chin, and he felt the distance between the life she believed she was living and the life that was actually happening stretch out like a fault line beneath their kitchen floor. He dropped her at school at 8:10. Mrs. Patterson, the kindergarten teacher, gave him the same warm but slightly concerned look she always did, the one that said she knew he was barely keeping it together, and she was too polite to mention it. He signed Lily in, kissed the top of her head, and walked back to his truck. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. No caller ID. The text was 3 sentences long, and he read them standing in the school parking lot with the engine running and the heater blowing warm air against his knees. "Keep your daughter close. You don't know who's watching. The next time might not be so gentle." Ethan read it twice, 3 times. Then he turned off his phone and sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, watching the front door of the school, watching every car that pulled in, every person who walked past, feeling the particular terror of a father who has just learned that the one thing in his life he cannot afford to lose has been noticed by someone who means harm. He drove to work. He spent the morning on a commercial renovation site, running cable and checking permits, moving through the mechanical rhythms of physical labor while his mind circled the same questions like a dog wearing a path around a tree. At noon, his phone rang. The caller ID said Sterling Dynamics. He almost didn't answer. He stood behind the site trailer with sawdust in his hair and plaster dust on his boots, and he stared at the screen until the 3rd ring, and then something made him pick up. "Mr. Cole." Victoria Sterling's voice sounded different on the phone, more controlled, more deliberate, like every word had been selected from a lineup. "We need to talk, not over the phone." "I got a threatening text message this morning," Ethan said. "About my daughter." A pause, brief, but he heard it. "Where can we meet?" she said. He gave her the address of a diner 6 blocks from the construction site, a place called Hal's that had cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during the previous administration. She said she'd be there in 40 minutes. She arrived in 32. Ethan was already sitting in the back booth, facing the door, the way Claire used to tease him about. "You always sit like you're expecting a gunfight," she'd said once, laughing. He hadn't laughed. It was just how he was built. You faced the door. You watched who came in. You kept your back to the wall. Victoria looked different in daylight. She was wearing a dark blue dress, fitted, no blazer this time. Her hair was pulled back in a way that was severe and deliberate. Her makeup was precise, nothing like the smudged mess of that morning. She carried herself with the kind of posture that said she was used to being the most important person in any room she entered, and she was correct about that roughly 100% of the time. She slid into the booth across from him and set a thin manila folder on the table between them. I've spent the last 4 hours with my security team and my chief financial officer, she said. And I'm going to tell you what they found, and you're not going to like it. Ethan looked at the folder. I haven't liked anything since 6:47 this morning. Victoria opened the folder. Inside were printed documents, spreadsheets, contracts, bank records. She turned the top page toward him and pointed to a line item highlighted in yellow. This is a disbursement record from the Meridian Bridge project, she said. $14.6 million allocated to a subcontractor called Greystone Civil Construction. The payment was authorized 4 months ago. Ethan shook his head. I don't know what that means. It means $14.6 million left my company and went somewhere it shouldn't have. The authorization signature on the transfer belongs to a mid-level project coordinator named Marcus Webb, who has since disappeared. But the secondary verification signature, the one that made the whole thing look legitimate, she turned to the second page. Ethan looked at it. At the bottom of a financial authorization form, in a signature block labeled Site Verification Authorized Representative, was his name. Ethan James Cole. Written in a handwriting that looked close to his but wasn't quite right, the way a careful forgery always has something slightly off about it, some pressure point or angle that doesn't match the original. That's not my signature, Ethan said. I know. I've never heard of Greystone Civil Construction. I've never worked on any Meridian Bridge project. I'm a foreman on residential and small commercial jobs. I don't even work in the same zip code as your projects. I know that too, Mr. Cole. I had my people run your background in the last 3 hours. You're clean. You have no connection to Sterling Dynamics whatsoever, which is exactly the point. What do you mean? Victoria closed the folder. She laced her fingers together on top of it, and Ethan noticed that her nails were short and unpainted, which surprised him. He'd expected someone like her to have the kind of manicured hands you saw in magazine ads. Someone needed a name, she said. A real person with no connection to the company, no reason to be on the records, and no resources to fight back when the whole thing collapsed. They picked you because you're nobody. Ethan felt the word land like a slap. He didn't flinch. He'd been nobody for a long time. Whoever stole that money used your identity as a layer of protection, Victoria continued. If it's ever audited, and it's about to be, your name is the one that shows up on the authorization, not theirs. And as of this morning, they've created a scenario where you and I were found together in compromising circumstances, which means if either of us tries to report this, it looks like we're involved. Together. Personally and financially. So this whole thing, drugging us, putting you in my apartment, that was about making us look dirty. Yes. That's insane. That's $14.6 million, Mr. Cole. People have done much worse for much less. Ethan sat back in the booth. The vinyl squeaked under him. He could hear the sounds of the diner, the clatter of plates, the murmur of other conversations, the hiss of the grill, but it all felt like it was happening far away, behind glass, in someone else's life. The text I got this morning mentioned my daughter, he said. Somebody threatened a 6-year-old. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes shifted. A slight contraction, barely visible. Show me. He pulled out his phone and showed her the message. She read it, and he watched her jaw work the way it had that morning. The same controlled tension, the same refusal to let whatever she was feeling reach her face. Do you have any idea who sent this? She asked. No. Do you have anyone who could watch your daughter while we deal with this? My neighbor, Mrs. Huang. She's 73. Does Mrs. Huang have a security system? She has a cat and a deadbolt. Victoria's mouth thinned. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was the closest thing to one he'd seen from her. I'm going to arrange for someone to keep watch on your building, quietly. My team is good and they won't be noticed. I don't need your security team. Mr. Cole. She leaned forward. Someone put me in your bed to make us both look complicit in a multi-million-dollar fraud. They threatened your child, and your name is forged on documents that could put you in a federal prison for 20 years. You need my security team. You need my lawyers. And frankly, you need me, because I am the only person in this city with the resources and the motivation to find out who did this and take them apart. Ethan looked at her. He was not a man who accepted help easily. Claire had always said it was his worst quality. that he would rather carry the entire weight of the world on his back than admit he couldn't do it alone. She'd called it pride. He'd called it survival. Either way, she wasn't wrong. But Claire wasn't here anymore. And someone had threatened Lily. "Okay," he said. Victoria nodded once. She reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. Matte black, white lettering, just her name and a phone number. No title, no address. The kind of card that said she didn't need to tell you who she was because you already knew. "I'm going to find out who did this," she said. "And when I do, I will make them wish they had chosen someone else to destroy." Ethan pocketed the card. He watched her stand up, smooth her dress with one hand, and walk out of the diner without looking back. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't offer reassurance. She made a promise that sounded like a threat, and then she left. He sat in the booth for another 10 minutes, drinking coffee that was now cold, thinking about his daughter and his dead wife, and a pregnancy test dated 3 weeks after a funeral, and a signature that looked like his but wasn't, and a woman who ran a billion-dollar company who had woken up in his bed, and a text message that made his blood feel like ice water in his veins. Then he paid his check, left a good tip because the waitress looked tired, and drove back to work. He picked Lily up at 5:15, same as always. She told him about a boy named Jackson who had eaten glue during art time, and about how she'd learned to write the letter Q, which she demonstrated on the back of a receipt with a crayon she'd smuggled home in her pocket. Ethan listened and asked questions and made all the right sounds, and inside he was counting every car behind them on the road and checking every face and every crosswalk and running a calculation in his head about how much it would cost to move, to start over, to take his daughter somewhere no one could find them. But he couldn't run. He knew that. Running meant leaving behind the only evidence that could prove he was innocent. Running meant looking guilty. Running meant taking Lily away from her school and her friends and the only life she knew, and he had already taken her mother. He would not take anything else. That night, after Lily was in bed, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his phone and the manila folder Victoria had left behind. She'd pushed it across the table to him before she left, the way you'd pass someone ammunition. And he read through every page. The Meridian Bridge project was a public-private partnership between Sterling Dynamics and the State Transportation Department. Estimated budget, $210 million. The money that had been siphoned through Greystone Civil Construction was hidden inside a series of legitimate-looking change orders and materials requisitions. Somebody had built a very careful, very patient pipeline to drain funds from the project, and they'd been doing it for at least 18 months. His phone buzzed. He looked at it, expecting another threat. It was Victoria. "My IT director found something. The security cameras in my building's parking garage captured footage of a van outside my restaurant last night. Same van was photographed outside your apartment 30 minutes later. License plate is registered to a shell company. We're tracing it." Ethan typed back, "Who do you think did this?" 3 dots appeared and disappeared, then reappeared, then disappeared again. Then her response came through, and it was just a name, no context, no explanation, like she'd been holding it between her teeth all day and finally decided to spit it out. Damian Cross. Ethan didn't know the name. He typed, "Who is that?" "My senior vice president of infrastructure development. He has access to every project file, every financial system, every contractor database in the company. He hired Marcus Webb. He had the means, the access, and the motive." Motive? "I denied his promotion to chief operating officer 6 months ago. He wanted to run this company. I told him no. Some men don't take no well, Mr. Cole." Ethan stared at the screen. A man who'd been denied a promotion, deciding to steal millions and frame innocent people and threaten children. It sounded like a movie, the kind of thing that happened to other people in other cities and stories you read about and shook your head at. But the pregnancy test was still in his wife's drawer, and the threat was still on his phone, and the forgery was still on the documents, and none of it was a movie. It was Tuesday, and it was his life. He typed, "What do we do?" Victoria's response was immediate, as if she'd already thought it through, already laid it out, already built the plan while he was still catching up. "We find the proof, and we bury him." Ethan set his phone down. He walked to Lily's room and stood in the doorway, watching her sleep. She'd kicked her covers off, the way she always did, and Waddles was wedged between her head and the pillow at an angle that couldn't possibly be comfortable, but that she would defend with absolute conviction if challenged. He pulled the covers back over her, tucked Waddles against her chest, brushed the hair off her forehead with the back of his hand, gently, the way Claire used to do it. "I'm going to fix this," he whispered. Not to Lily, not to anyone, just to the dark room and the quiet apartment and the weight of everything pressing down on him. "I don't know how yet, but I'm going to fix this." He closed her door to exactly 3 inches and went back to the kitchen table and picked up his phone and started reading. 3 days passed before Ethan heard from Victoria again. 3 days of checking his rearview mirror every 30 seconds on the drive to Lily's school. 3 days of walking her to the classroom door instead of dropping her at the entrance, ignoring the looks from other parents who probably thought he was being overprotective, which he was, because someone had told him to keep his daughter close, and he didn't know what close enough looked like anymore. 3 days of sleeping with the kitchen knife on the nightstand where Claire's reading glasses used to be, feeling ridiculous about it, but not moving it. On the 3rd night, his phone rang at 11:15 p.m. "I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning," Victoria said. No greeting, no preamble. She spoke like someone who had been mid-conversation in her own head and had simply decided to include him. "I have work." "Take the day." "I can't just take the day. I'm hourly. I don't get paid if I don't show up." A pause. He could hear something in the background, a low murmur, papers, the ambient hum of someone who was still in her office at 11:15 on a Thursday night. "Then come before work. 6:30. I'll have coffee." "I don't need your coffee." "Mr. Cole, my IT director has found something that connects Damien Cross directly to the Greystone Shell Company. She also found your name in 17 additional documents you've never seen. If you'd rather discuss this at your convenience, I understand, but your convenience may not survive the week." Ethan closed his eyes. 6:30. He woke up at 5 a.m., got Lily dressed and fed, and dropped her at Mrs. Huang's apartment at 6 with a bag containing her school clothes, her lunch, and Waddles. Mrs. Huang didn't ask questions. She never did. She just took Lily's hand and said, "We're making dumplings today," as if that explained everything, and maybe it did. Sterling Dynamics headquarters looked different at 6:30 in the morning. The lobby was empty except for a security guard who checked Ethan's ID, made a phone call, and pointed him toward a private elevator that required a keycard he didn't have. The guard swiped it for him and said, 32nd floor, without making eye contact. The elevator was the kind that made no sound. No rattle, no hum. Just a smooth upward motion that made Ethan's ears pop slightly as the floor numbers climbed. He watched them tick past, 15, 20, 25, 30, and thought about how his own building didn't have a working elevator at all, and how the distance between his life and Victoria's could be measured in stories. The doors opened onto a hallway that was wide and silent and smelled like new carpet. Victoria was waiting for him outside a glass-walled conference room, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She handed him one without asking if he wanted it. "Black," she said. 2 sugars. "Your file said you worked construction for 11 years. Construction workers drink black coffee with sugar." "My file. I told you my people ran your background." "Your people found out how I take my coffee." "My people are thorough, Mr. Cole." He took the cup because he was tired and it was early and the coffee was hot. "You can call me Ethan." She looked at him for a moment and something in her posture shifted. A small adjustment, barely visible, like a wall being lowered 1 brick. "Come inside. Naomi is waiting." The conference room had a long table, a wall of windows looking out over the city, and a woman Ethan had never seen before sitting at the far end with 3 laptops open in front of her. She was maybe 35, with short black hair and a face that looked like it hadn't slept in a while. She wore a wrinkled button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and there was a half-eaten granola bar beside one of the laptops. "Naomi Tran," Victoria said, "Director of Information Technology. She's been with me for 6 years, and she is the only person in this building I trust completely." Naomi looked up. Her eyes were sharp and a little bloodshot. "You're the foreman," she said. "I'm the foreman. Sit down. This is going to take a minute." Ethan sat. Victoria took the chair beside him, and Naomi turned one of the laptops toward them. On the screen was a diagram that looked like a subway map designed by someone having a breakdown. Colored lines connecting boxes with names and dates and dollar amounts, branching and converging in patterns that made Ethan's head hurt just looking at them. "Okay," Naomi said, leaning forward. "Here's what I've got. Damian Cross has been running a parallel financial operation inside this company for at least 22 months. He set up Greystone Civil Construction as a subcontractor, submitted bids through the normal procurement process, and had them approved by Marcus Webb, who reported directly to him. The invoices looked legitimate because they referenced real project milestones and real materials orders. The only problem is that Greystone doesn't actually exist. It's a shell registered in Delaware with a mailing address that traces back to a virtual office in Reno. No employees, no equipment, no physical presence anywhere." "And my name is on the approvals," Ethan said. "Your name is everywhere." Naomi pulled up a spreadsheet. 17 authorization forms, 8 materials verification reports, 3 safety compliance sign-offs, all with your name and a signature that's close enough to pass a casual inspection, but wouldn't survive a forensic analysis. Someone pulled your information from a public records database, your contractor's license, your state ID, your work history, and built a paper identity around it. You were the fall guy before you even knew there was a fall. Ethan stared at the screen. 17 documents. His name, over and over, attached to transactions he'd never authorized for a project he'd never worked on for a company that didn't exist. "How much money total?" he asked. Naomi glanced at Victoria. Victoria nodded. $23.8 million, Naomi said, across 14 disbursements over 22 months. The money goes from Sterling Dynamics to Greystone, from Greystone to a series of intermediary accounts in the Caymans and Luxembourg, and from there into private investment vehicles that are extremely difficult to trace. Difficult, but not impossible. "And you can prove Damian did this?" Ethan asked. Naomi's expression changed. The confidence dimmed slightly, replaced by something more cautious. "That's where it gets complicated. Everything I've shown you is reconstructed from fragments, email metadata, access logs, financial discrepancies. It's circumstantial. It points to Damian, but it doesn't prove he's the one who pushed the buttons. He's been very careful. He used intermediaries for everything. Marcus Webb was his proxy on the financial side, and Webb is gone. Left the country 3 weeks ago. No forwarding address. So we have nothing. We have fragments," Naomi corrected, "but there's one thing that could change everything." She pulled up a different screen. Sterling Dynamics runs a backup server system for all critical financial data. Daily incremental backups, weekly full backups, stored on a secure server in the building's sub-basement. The system is automated, but it requires manual authorization to access or delete. Damian knows about these backups. 2 weeks ago, he submitted a request to the IT department to perform a routine data migration that would have overwritten the backup archives from the last 24 months. "Let me guess," Ethan said. "You stopped it." Naomi almost smiled. Almost. "I delayed it. I told his assistant there was a hardware compatibility issue that needed to be resolved first. Bought us about a week. But the migration is scheduled to go through next Friday. Once it does, those backups are gone, and with them any direct evidence that Damian altered the financial records. So we need to get to the backups before Friday," Ethan said. "We need to copy the backups before Friday," Naomi said. "The originals stay in place so Damian doesn't know we have them. But accessing the backup server requires physical presence in the sub-basement, and the sub-basement is behind a biometric lock that only 3 people in the company can open. Me, the head of facilities, and Damian Cross. So you go down there and copy them. At 6:30 in the morning with the CEO sitting next to me? It'd be flagged within an hour. Every access to that room is logged. Time, date, biometric ID. If I go during business hours, Damian will know before I'm back at my desk." Victoria, who had been silent through all of this, spoke for the first time. "Which is why we go at night." Ethan looked at her. "You want to break into your own building. I want to access my own server, in my own company, to retrieve my own financial records. The fact that I have to do it at 2 in the morning to avoid alerting a man who's stealing from me is the part that should bother you, not the logistics." "The logistics bother me plenty." Victoria set her coffee down. "Ethan." It was the first time she'd used his first name, and it landed differently than he expected. Not warm, not cold, just direct, like she'd decided the formality was wasting time they didn't have. Damian Cross didn't just steal money, he built a system, a machine designed to protect itself. Marcus Webb was one gear, the forged documents with your name were another. And whatever happened the night you and I were drugged and placed together, that was another. Each piece is designed to discredit anyone who tries to expose him. If we go to the police, he'll activate the evidence against you. If I go to my board of directors without proof, he'll leak photographs or security footage or whatever else he has from that night. He's been planning this for years. We get one shot. And if it doesn't work, then you go to prison for financial fraud, I lose my company, and he walks away with $23 million. Ethan rubbed his face with both hands. He thought about Lily. He thought about the text message on his phone. He thought about the pregnancy test in Claire's drawer that he still hadn't dealt with because every time he tried to think about it, the ground shifted under him and he couldn't find his footing. I need to know something, he said. Victoria waited. The night we were drugged, you said you were at a client dinner at Rosario's. Who arranged that dinner? Victoria's eyes narrowed. Damian's office. And whoever drugged you had to know where you'd be that evening, what you'd be drinking, and how to get you out of the restaurant without anyone noticing. Yes. Which means he has people, not just inside the company, outside it. Damian Cross has spent 15 years building relationships in this city, Victoria said. He knows contractors, politicians, lawyers, investigators. He's the kind of man who collects favors the way other people collect stamps. Patient, methodical, and when he needs something done, he calls someone who owes him. And what do we have? Victoria looked at Naomi. Naomi looked at Ethan. Neither of them answered for a moment, and in that silence, the three of them sat in a glass room 32 stories above a city that didn't know or care about any of this, and the weight of what they were about to do settled over them like weather. We have each other, Naomi said finally, and we have 5 days. Ethan drove back across town with the coffee still in his hand, cold now, thinking about trust. He didn't trust Victoria Sterling. He couldn't afford to. She was a billionaire CEO who had entered his life through circumstances that made no sense, and her motivations were her own, and he had no way of knowing whether she cared about clearing his name or only about protecting her empire. Both things could be true at the same time, and probably were. And Ethan had learned a long time ago that people could want to help you and use you simultaneously without seeing any contradiction. But he didn't have a choice. That was the thing about corners. You didn't pick them. They picked you. He called Mrs. Huang from the truck. Lily's fine, she said before he could ask. She ate 3 dumplings and asked if she could adopt my cat. I told her the cat was too old and too mean, and she said she didn't mind. That sounds like Lily. Ethan, Mrs. Huang's voice changed. Not dramatically. She was not a dramatic woman, but enough that he noticed. There was a man outside the building this morning, standing across the street near the bus stop. He was there when I took Lily to school, and he was there when I walked back. I've never seen him before. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. What did he look like? Tall, dark jacket. He was wearing sunglasses, which was strange because it was cloudy. He looked like he was waiting for someone, but no bus came and he didn't leave. Did he see Lily? He watched us walk out the front door. He watched us walk down the block. Then he took out his phone and made a call. Ethan pulled over. He sat on the side of the road with the engine idling and his forehead against the steering wheel and a feeling in his chest like someone had wrapped a fist around his heart and was squeezing slowly. Mrs. Huang, can you keep Lily tonight? I'll pay you double. You will not pay me double. You will pay me nothing, and I will make sure she does her homework and brushes her teeth. Come get her when you're ready. He hung up and called Victoria. There's someone watching my building, he said. Tall, dark jacket, sunglasses on a cloudy day. My neighbor saw him this morning. He heard Victoria exhale. I'll send Marcus, my head of security, to your block. He'll identify the watcher and run the plates on any vehicle nearby. This is getting worse. This was always going to get worse before it got better. That's how men like Damian operate. Pressure, escalation. They want you scared because scared people make mistakes. I'm not scared, Ethan said, and it was mostly a lie and they both knew it, but she didn't call him on it. Good. Because I need you to do something. What? I need you to meet Damian Cross. Ethan actually pulled the phone away from his ear and looked at it, as if the device itself might explain why a reasonable person would say something so unreasonable. You want me to meet the man who framed me and threatened my daughter. I want you to attend a project status meeting at Sterling Dynamics on Thursday afternoon. It's a routine meeting that happens every 2 weeks. Every senior executive attends, including Damian. You'll be there as a contractor consultant. I'll create the paperwork. I need to see how he reacts when he sees you, whether he recognizes you, whether he gives anything away. You want to use me as bait. I want to use you as a mirror. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. Ethan, that directness again. If Damian sees you and doesn't react, it means he's never met you, and the forgery was done entirely through intermediaries. If he does react, even slightly, it means he knows who you are, which means he personally directed the operation against you, which means we can narrow our evidence accordingly. Either way, we learned something. And if he reacts by having someone hurt my daughter? Victoria was quiet for a moment, longer than usual. When she spoke again, her voice was different, lower, stripped of the executive cadence, something rawer underneath. I will not let that happen, she said. I give you my word. Ethan didn't know what her word was worth. He'd known her for 3 days. But he could hear something in those 6 words that sounded like it cost her something to say, like the promise had weight, and she knew it, and she was choosing to carry it anyway. Thursday, he said. He spent the next 2 days preparing, though he wasn't sure what preparation looked like. Victoria sent over a visitor badge and a fabricated consulting agreement with a company called Ridgeline Structural that she'd apparently created that morning specifically for this purpose. She sent a brief on the Meridian Bridge project, the public version, sanitized, full of engineering specifications and timeline projections that meant nothing to Ethan but would allow him to nod intelligently if anyone asked questions. She also sent him a photograph of Damian Cross. Ethan opened it on his phone while sitting in his truck during lunch. The man in the photo was maybe 45, with the kind of face that looked trustworthy on first glance. Even features, a practiced smile, the hint of gray at the temples that men in corporate environments cultivated because it suggested wisdom and reliability. He wore a charcoal suit and a burgundy tie, and he was shaking hands with someone at what looked like a fundraiser or gala, and his expression was the expression of a man who knew exactly how he appeared to other people and had spent years perfecting it. Ethan studied the face, tried to feel something, recognition, anger, fear. He felt nothing. The man was a stranger who had stolen millions, forged his name, and threatened his child, and Ethan looked at his photograph and felt the particular emptiness of confronting evil that has no face, no scar, no visible sign of what lives underneath. Thursday came. Ethan wore the one suit he owned, the one he'd bought for Claire's funeral, and he drove to Sterling Dynamics and parked in the visitor lot and walked through the lobby feeling like a man walking into a building that wanted to eat him. The meeting was in a conference room on the 28th floor. 12 people around a table, all in suits, all with laptops and leather folders, and the particular attentive posture of people who knew the CEO was watching. Victoria sat at the head. She introduced Ethan as a structural consultant from Ridgeline, and nobody questioned it, because nobody questioned Victoria Sterling. Damian Cross was seated 4 chairs down on the left side of the table. Ethan forced himself not to look at him immediately. He sat down, opened the folder Victoria had prepared for him, and pretended to review documents while the meeting began. Budget updates, timeline revisions, a discussion about concrete specifications that Ethan actually understood, which almost made him smile because it was the only normal thing in the room. 20 minutes in, he looked up, casually. The way you'd look up to check the room during a meeting you were only half paying attention to. Damian was already looking at him, not with surprise, not with confusion, with recognition. The kind of recognition that happens between 2 people who have never met, but one of whom knows exactly who the other is. Damian's eyes met Ethan's for perhaps 2 seconds. Not long, not lingering, just enough. And in that brief connection, Ethan saw something that confirmed every fear he'd been carrying for a week. Damian knew who he was. Damian knew, and he wasn't afraid. The meeting ended at 4 p.m. Ethan shook hands with people whose names he immediately forgot, accepted 2 business cards, and walked out of the conference room with Victoria's hand briefly touching his elbow to guide him toward her private office. She closed the door. Well? He knows me. You're sure? He looked at me the way you look at a piece on a chessboard you already planned to sacrifice. He wasn't surprised I was there. He was measuring me. Victoria crossed her arms. She stood behind her desk, silhouetted against the windows, and for a moment she looked exactly like what she was, a woman standing in the center of a kingdom someone was trying to take from her. Then he knows we're coming, she said, which means we have to move faster. Naomi says she can be ready by Saturday night. Then Saturday night it is. They looked at each other across the desk, across the enormous gap between their lives, and Ethan felt something shift between them that he couldn't name. Not trust, exactly. Not affection. Something more practical and more fragile. The recognition that they were tied together now, knotted by circumstance and conspiracy, and the only way out was through. He drove home in the dark, picked up Lily from Mrs. Huang's apartment, carried her upstairs because she'd fallen asleep on the couch, her face pressed against wattles, her fingers curled loosely around his collar. He laid her in bed and pulled the covers up and stood in her doorway for a long time, listening to her breathe. 2 more days. 48 hours before Naomi would walk into the sub-basement and try to copy the evidence that could save them or destroy them. 48 hours before Ethan would sit in his apartment monitoring security cameras, while Victoria raced across the city, all of them balanced on the edge of something that had no guardrails and no net. He went to the kitchen, opened Claire's nightstand drawer. He'd moved the pregnancy test there, keeping it close, not ready to deal with it, but unable to throw it away. He held it under the kitchen light and looked at the date in Claire's handwriting and felt the old grief stir in his chest, like an animal that never fully went to sleep. Who were you going to tell? He thought. Were you going to tell me at all? There was no answer. There never would be. Some questions don't get resolved. They just sit inside you, taking up space, changing the shape of everything around them. Ethan put the test back in the drawer and closed it. Saturday was coming. Saturday arrived the way bad weather does. Slowly at first, then all at once. Ethan spent the morning with Lily at the park 3 blocks from their apartment, pushing her on the swings while the November wind cut through his jacket and the sky hung low and gray above the city. She wanted to go higher. She always wanted to go higher. More, Daddy? More? She kept saying, and he pushed harder, watching her small body arc upward against the clouds, her laughter bright and careless in a way that made his chest ache because she didn't know. She didn't know about any of it. The forged documents, the threats, the stranger who had slept in her mother's place, the plan that would unfold in 12 hours that could either save them or make everything infinitely worse. Daddy, are you okay? She was looking at him from the swing, her legs dangling, her face serious in that way only children's faces can be serious. Total, absolute, uncomplicated concern. I'm fine, Bug. You look worried. I'm just thinking about stuff. What stuff? Grown-up stuff. Boring stuff. Is it about Mommy? The question hit him like a physical thing. Lily asked about Claire sometimes, not often, and usually in the same matter-of-fact tone she used for questions about dinosaurs or weather, curious but not devastated, the way a child processes loss they experience too young to fully understand. But today the question felt different. Today it felt like she was seeing something in his face that he thought he'd hidden. A little bit, he said. Yeah, I think about Mommy sometimes too. What do you think about? I think about how she smelled, like the soap in the yellow bottle. Ethan's throat closed. The yellow bottle, lemon verbena hand soap. Claire had bought it at a farmer's market 2 months before she died, and Lily remembered the smell but not the funeral, and that was maybe the saddest and most merciful thing he'd ever heard. She did smell like that, he said. You're right. Can we get some? The yellow soap? Sure, Bug. We'll look for it. He took her home at noon, made grilled cheese sandwiches that he slightly burned on one side because his mind was somewhere else. Lily ate hers without complaint because she was 6, and burned cheese was still cheese. He called Mrs. Huang at 1 o'clock and asked if she could watch Lily overnight. Again? Mrs. Huang said. Not accusatory, curious. I have a thing tonight. Work-related. Ethan, you work in construction. What kind of construction happens on Saturday night? The kind I can't explain right now. Mrs. Huang was quiet for a moment. Then, bring her down at 6. I'll make congee. At 3 p.m., Victoria called. No small talk. She never did small talk. Ethan was starting to wonder if she'd been born without the gene for it. Naomi will enter the building at 1 a.m. through the maintenance entrance on the east side. The biometric lock on the sub-basement is tied to the main security system, which runs a diagnostic cycle between 1:15 and 1:45. During that window, access logs are buffered but not transmitted in real time. It gives her 30 minutes. 30 minutes to find the backup server, copy 22 months of financial data, and get out without being seen. 28 minutes, realistically. She needs 2 minutes on each end for the elevator. And where will you be? In my car outside the building. If anything goes wrong, if security is alerted, if someone shows up who shouldn't be there, I call Naomi and she aborts. And where will I be? At your apartment. I'm having a remote access feed set up for the building's security cameras. You'll be able to see the lobby, the parking garage, the east entrance, and the hallway outside the sub-basement. 4 screens. If you see anything wrong, you call me. I call Naomi. So I'm sitting at my kitchen table watching security cameras while a woman I've known for a week sneaks into a sub-basement. That's correct. Ethan rubbed his jaw. He hadn't shaved in 3 days, and the stubble was starting to itch. Victoria, if this goes wrong, it won't. If it does, if Naomi gets caught, if Damien finds out, what happens to my daughter? The question sat between them like something heavy dropped on a table. Ethan could hear Victoria breathing on the other end of the line, and he could tell she was choosing her words carefully, which was something she did when the truth was more complicated than the answer she wanted to give. I have a legal team on standby, she said. If anything happens tonight that compromises your position, they will file an emergency motion to protect your custody rights before business hours Monday morning. I've already briefed them. You briefed your lawyers about my custody rights. You're a single father who is being threatened by a man with unlimited resources. Your custody is the first thing he would target, so yes, I briefed my lawyers. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. He wanted to be angry about it, about the presumption, the overreach, the casual way she had inserted herself into the most private part of his life. But he wasn't angry. He was something closer to grateful. And that bothered him even more because gratitude meant dependence, and dependence meant trust. And trust was something he'd been rationing like water in a desert ever since Claire died. Thank you, he said. The words came out rough. Don't thank me yet. He dropped Lily at Mrs. Huang's at 6 o'clock. She went happily, carrying Waddles in one arm and a coloring book in the other. At the door, she turned and looked at him with Claire's eyes in Claire's face. Daddy, will you be here in the morning? First thing, Bug. Promise. Okay, Mrs. Huang says we're going to watch a movie about a fish. Sounds good. Be good for her. I'm always good. That's debatable. She grinned and disappeared inside, and Ethan stood in the hallway for a long moment after the door closed, pressing his hand flat against the wall, breathing. Then he went upstairs and waited for the night to begin. At 10 p.m., a courier arrived with a laptop and a set of instructions from Naomi. The laptop was already configured. 4 quadrants on the screen, each showing a different camera feed from Sterling Dynamics headquarters. Black and white. Grainy. The lobby was empty except for the night security guard at the front desk, a heavy-set man reading something on his phone. The parking garage showed rows of cars, mostly empty, under fluorescent lights that gave everything a sickly yellow cast. The east entrance was dark. The hallway outside the sub-basement was a narrow corridor with a single overhead light and a heavy gray door at the end. Ethan set the laptop on his kitchen table, sat down, and stared at the screens. At midnight, Victoria texted, "In position, 2 blocks east. Naomi is en route." At 12:40, Ethan saw a figure appear on the east entrance camera. Small, moving quickly, wearing dark clothes and carrying a backpack. Naomi. She swiped a keycard at the door, and it opened, and she slipped inside. At 12:45, she appeared on the hallway camera. She walked quickly but didn't run. Running would look suspicious on footage even if no one was watching in real time. She reached the gray door, pressed her thumb to the biometric panel, and waited. 1 second, 2, 3. The lock clicked. She pushed the door open and disappeared inside. Ethan's phone rang. Victoria. "She's in," Ethan said. "I know, her comms are live. She says the server room is colder than she expected and she forgot to bring a jacket." "That's what she's worried about? The temperature?" "Naomi deals with stress through complaints. Let her work." Ethan watched the screens. The lobby guard hadn't moved. The parking garage was still. The east entrance was dark and empty. The hallway was silent. Everything was going exactly as planned, which made him more nervous, not less, because in his experience, things that went exactly as planned were things that hadn't gone wrong yet. At 1:02 a.m., the parking garage camera showed a car pulling in. Black sedan. No front plates. It parked in the far corner of the garage, away from the other vehicles, in a spot that happened to be directly beneath one of the security cameras. The engine stayed running. "Victoria," Ethan said. "I see it. Naomi, hold position." Through the phone, Ethan could hear the muffled sound of Naomi's voice, tinny and distant through whatever earpiece she was wearing. He couldn't make out words. The sedan's driver door opened. A man got out. He was wearing a dark overcoat, and he moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who belonged in the building and knew it. He walked toward the elevator bank, and as he passed under the garage lights, Ethan saw his face. He didn't recognize him, not from the photo Victoria had sent, not from the meeting on Thursday, but something about the way the man carried himself, the deliberate stride, the slight forward lean, the sense of purpose that bordered on entitlement, sent a cold thread of unease through Ethan's chest. "Who is that?" Ethan said. "That's Gerald Price," Victoria said, and her voice had gone flat. "He's Damien's personal attorney." "What is Damien's personal attorney doing in your building at 1 in the morning?" "Nothing good." On the hallway camera, the corridor outside the sub-basement was still empty. Naomi was behind the gray door, invisible, doing whatever she needed to do with the server. The elevator in the parking garage was moving. Ethan could see the floor indicator above the doors ticking upward. 1, 2, 3. "Where is he going?" Ethan asked. "I don't know. But the sub-basement is on level B2. If he's going down instead of up, how would he get through the biometric lock?" "Damien is one of the 3 people with access. If he gave Price his credentials somehow, a cloned badge, a bypass code." "Victoria." "I know." The elevator stopped on 3. On the lobby camera, the security guard looked up from his phone, then looked back down. He hadn't noticed anything, or he'd been told not to notice. "Naomi," Victoria said into whatever communication channel she was using. "How much longer?" Ethan couldn't hear the response, but Victoria relayed it. "She says 12 minutes. The data transfer is at 40%. She doesn't have 12 minutes. She knows." On the parking garage camera, the black sedan sat motionless, engine still running. On the 3rd floor, which Ethan couldn't see because there was no camera for that level, Gerald Price was doing something. Moving somewhere. Maybe toward the sub-basement. Maybe not. 8 minutes passed. Ethan watched the screens without blinking, his eyes burning, his hands flat on the table. The lobby guard turned a page of whatever he was reading. The garage stayed empty. The hallway stayed clear. Then the elevator moved again, going down. B1, B2. "He's coming down," Ethan said. "Naomi, abort. Get out now." Victoria, if she leaves before the transfer, if Price finds her in that server room, it's over. Not just for the evidence, for her. Damien will have her fired, arrested, or worse. Get out, Naomi. Now. On the hallway camera, the gray door opened and Naomi emerged. She was moving fast, her backpack slung over one shoulder, and Ethan could see that she was carrying something. A portable hard drive, maybe, clutched against her chest like something precious. She turned left, heading away from the elevator bank, toward what Ethan assumed was a stairwell. She made it 15 feet before the elevator doors opened behind her. Gerald Price stepped into the hallway. He saw Naomi immediately. There was no way not to. The corridor was narrow and straight and lit by a single overhead light, and she was the only person in it. They faced each other, 20 feet apart. The camera was above and behind Price, so Ethan could see Naomi's face, but not his. She had stopped walking. She was standing very still, the way a person stands when every option available to them is bad, and they're trying to calculate which one is least bad. "Victoria, what do I do?" Ethan said into the phone, and he hated how helpless he sounded, how useless he was, sitting in his apartment watching a woman he barely knew face down a threat he couldn't touch. "Stay on the line," Victoria said. He could hear her car engine. She was driving. Fast. "I'm coming." On the screen, Price said something to Naomi. Ethan couldn't hear it. The cameras had no audio. But he could see Naomi's expression change, a hardening around her jaw, a lift of her chin that was either courage or defiance, or both. She said something back. Price took a step toward her. She didn't step back. She held her ground, and Ethan could see her hand tighten on the hard drive, pulling it closer to her body, shielding it. Price reached into his coat. For one horrible second, Ethan thought he was reaching for a weapon, and his whole body went rigid, his fingers pressing into the table so hard his knuckles went white. But Price pulled out a phone. He held it up, and Ethan realized with a sinking feeling that he was photographing Naomi, documenting her presence in the sub-basement corridor at 1:18 in the morning, creating evidence of exactly the kind of unauthorized access that would end her career and possibly her freedom. Naomi didn't move. She stood there and let him take the picture, and then she said something else, and whatever it was made Price lower the phone slightly. He responded. She responded. They were having a conversation in a hallway at 1 in the morning, and Ethan was watching it happen on a grainy black and white feed from 3 miles away, and he had never felt more powerless in his life. "Victoria, how far out are you?" 4 minutes. She's stalling him. She's keeping him talking. That's because Naomi is smarter than everyone in that building, including me. 3 minutes passed. On the screen, Naomi and Price continued their silent conversation. At one point, Price gestured toward the hard drive, and Naomi shook her head. He gestured again, more forcefully. She shook her head again. He took a step forward. She took a step back. They were doing a strange, slow dance in a concrete corridor, and the stakes were invisible to anyone who didn't know what was on that drive. Then, on the lobby camera, the front doors opened, and Victoria Sterling walked in. She walked past the security guard, who scrambled to his feet and said something she didn't acknowledge. She walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and stood with her back straight and her face absolutely blank, and she rode down to B2, and when the doors opened, she stepped into the hallway behind Gerald Price. "Gerald," she said. Ethan couldn't hear her voice, but he could read her lips on the camera, and he could see Price turn around, and he could see the expression on Price's face shift from dominance to something considerably less certain. Victoria said something else. It was longer, 3 or 4 sentences. Price responded. Victoria cut him off. She stepped past him, walking toward Naomi, and positioned herself between her IT director and Damien's attorney, and she stood there like a wall. Not a large wall, she was maybe 5'7", but a wall nonetheless. Immovable, deliberate. A woman standing in her own building telling a man he did not belong there. Price said something. Victoria pointed toward the elevator. Price didn't move. Victoria said something else and took out her phone, and whatever she said while holding that phone made Price recalculate, because he straightened his coat, looked at Naomi one more time, and walked back to the elevator. He got in. The doors closed. On the parking garage camera, the elevator arrived at garage level. Price walked to the black sedan, got in, and drove out of the parking structure. His taillights disappeared around the corner. Ethan exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. His hands were shaking again, the way they'd shaken when he found the pregnancy test, the way they shook whenever his body understood something his mind was still catching up to. His phone was still connected. "Victoria." "She's okay," Victoria said. "She has the drive." "Did you get everything? The full transfer?" A pause. Then Naomi's voice, faint but audible, through Victoria's phone. 87%. I had to pull the plug when Price showed up." "Is 87% enough?" Ethan asked. Another pause. Longer this time. "It's going to have to be," Naomi said. Ethan closed the laptop. The screens went dark. He sat at his kitchen table in the silence of his empty apartment and pressed his palms against his eyes and breathed. Just breathed, because breathing was the only thing he could control right now. His phone buzzed. Victoria. "Go get some sleep. I need you sharp tomorrow." "What happens tomorrow?" Tomorrow I call an emergency board meeting, and we end this." Ethan set the phone down. He walked to Lily's room, out of habit, forgetting for a moment that she wasn't there, and stood in the doorway looking at her empty bed with the purple comforter pulled back and wattles missing from the pillow. The room looked wrong without her. The whole apartment looked wrong without her. She was 3 floors down, safe with Mrs. Huang and a cat, and a movie about a fish, but the absence of her was physical, a hole in the air where her breathing should have been. He went to his own room, lay down on the bed, stared at the ceiling fan with its wobbling blade, thought about Claire and the pregnancy test and the date in blue ink and the 23 days between death and the impossible. Thought about Naomi standing in that corridor with a hard drive pressed against her chest and a man's phone pointed at her face. Thought about Victoria walking into her own building at 1 a.m. to stand between her people and someone else's weapon. He thought about Damien Cross, somewhere in this city, in some expensive apartment or townhouse, sleeping or not sleeping, planning or recalibrating. A man who had built a machine designed to consume other people's lives and convert them into money and power and control. And Ethan thought about the board meeting that would happen in a matter of hours, and he knew that whatever came next would be the thing that determined whether he kept his daughter, his freedom, and whatever was left of his name. He closed his eyes and waited for morning. Morning came without mercy. Ethan hadn't slept. Not really. He drifted in and out of something that resembled sleep the way a puddle resembles a lake, shallow, brief, unsatisfying. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the grainy security footage, Naomi standing in that hallway, Price's phone raised like a weapon. Every time he started to drift, his body jerked him awake with the particular cruelty of adrenaline that has nowhere to go. At 5:30 a.m., he gave up and got out of bed. Showered, shaved for the first time in 4 days. Put on the funeral suit again because it was the only suit he owned, and today was the kind of day that required one. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror, dark circles under his eyes, a nick on his jaw from the razor, the face of a man who had aged 5 years and 12 days. And he thought, this is what it looks like when someone tries to take your life apart, and you show up anyway. He went downstairs to Mrs. Huang's apartment at 6:15. She opened the door in a quilted robe, holding a cup of tea. "She's still sleeping," Mrs. Huang said. "She woke up once around midnight and asked if you were coming. I told her you'd be here in the morning. She went back to sleep." "Thank you." Mrs. Huang studied his face. She was a woman who had survived things Ethan could only guess at. She'd come to this country alone at 19, raised 4 children, buried a husband, and still managed to make dumplings every Saturday, like the world owed her nothing, and she expected nothing from it. She looked at him the way she sometimes did, with a directness that bypassed politeness entirely. "Whatever you're doing today," she said, "be careful." "I will." "And eat something. You look like you're running on fumes." He ate a piece of toast standing at her kitchen counter while Lily slept in the next room. Then he kissed his daughter's forehead without waking her, thanked Mrs. Huang again, and drove across the city to Sterling Dynamics. Victoria had called the emergency board meeting for 9 a.m. She'd sent the summons at 3 a.m., a formal request citing urgent financial irregularities requiring immediate board attention. 7 directors, all of them notified, all of them confirmed. By the time Ethan pulled into the visitor lot at 7:45, 3 of them were already in the building, and the security team Victoria had assembled was positioned at every entrance. He found Victoria in her office on the 32nd floor. She was standing behind her desk, not sitting, wearing a black suit that looked like armor. Her hair was pulled back tight. No jewelry except a small watch. She looked like a woman who had decided to go to war and had dressed accordingly. Naomi was there too, sitting on the couch against the wall with a laptop balanced on her knees and 2 portable hard drives on the cushion beside her. She looked worse than Ethan did. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair was pulled into a messy knot, and there was a coffee stain on her sleeve that she either hadn't noticed or didn't care about. "How are you doing?" Ethan asked her. "I've been awake for 26 hours. Someone photographed me in a restricted corridor at 1 a.m, and I may or may not still have a job by lunchtime," Naomi said. "I'm doing great." "She's been rebuilding the financial trail from the backup data since 3 a.m., Victoria said. "Show him." Naomi turned the laptop toward Ethan. On the screen was a spreadsheet. Not the confusing subway map from before, but a clean chronological list of transactions: dates, amounts, account numbers, authorization signatures. Each line was color-coded: green for legitimate transactions, red for fraudulent ones, yellow for ones that were unclear. There was a lot of red. 23.8 million, Naomi said. 14 disbursements, all routed through Greystone Civil Construction to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Luxembourg. From there, the money was converted into cryptocurrency and reinvested through 3 different shell companies, all of which trace back to a single beneficial owner. Damien, Ethan said. Damien. Naomi pulled up another screen. But here's the part that matters. The backup server logs show that every one of these transactions was initiated from Damien's workstation, using Damien's network credentials during business hours. He didn't use a proxy for the actual transfers. He used proxies for the paperwork. Marcus Webb, your forged signature. But the digital fingerprints on the transactions themselves are his. IP address, login timestamp, session duration, all of it. And the 87%? Ethan asked. You said you didn't get the full backup. Naomi's jaw tightened. The 13% I'm missing covers the last 3 months of transactions. It's the most recent data, which means it might include any new accounts or transfers Damien set up after he realized we were looking. But for the board meeting, what I have is enough. The pattern is clear. The evidence is documented. The trail leads to one person. What about Price? Ethan said. He photographed you. He knows you were down there. Gerald Price is an attorney, Victoria said. He's paid to protect his client. If he reports Naomi's presence in the sub-basement, he also has to explain his own presence in the sub-basement at 1 in the morning. He was there without company authorization, using access credentials that don't belong to him. Whatever Damien told him to do down there, probably destroy the backups manually since the data migration wasn't happening fast enough. He can't report Naomi without incriminating himself. So we're betting that a lawyer will choose self-preservation over loyalty to his client, Ethan said. I'm betting on the only thing I've ever seen fail-safe in corporate law, Victoria said. Self-interest. Ethan sat down in one of the chairs facing her desk. He put his hands on his knees and looked at the floor for a moment, collecting himself. Then he looked up. What do you need me to do? Victoria came around the desk and sat on the edge of it, facing him. It was the closest she'd ever been to him physically, close enough that he could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes and the barely visible tremor in her left hand that she kept pressed against her thigh to hide. She was nervous. Victoria Sterling, CEO of a billion-dollar company, a woman who negotiated with governments and managed 1,000-person teams and had fired executives without flinching, was nervous. And she was trying not to show it, and she was mostly succeeding, and the effort it was costing her made her more human to Ethan than anything else she'd done in the 12 days he'd known her. I need you to stand in front of 7 board members and tell them what happened to you, she said. Not the financial data. Naomi handles that. Not the corporate structure. I handle that. I need you to tell them about the threats, about your daughter, about waking up in your own bed with a stranger beside you and realizing someone had invaded your home and your life and used you as a pawn in a game you didn't know existed. I need them to see what Damien Cross does to real people, not balance sheets, not quarterly reports, people. You want me to be the human element. I want you to be yourself. That's enough. Ethan looked at her. He thought about what it had cost him to get here. The sleepless nights, the fear, the constant surveillance of his own rear-view mirror, the weight of protecting Lily while carrying the knowledge that someone wanted to destroy him for no reason other than convenience. He thought about Claire and the pregnancy test and the questions that would never be answered. He thought about the fact that 2 weeks ago he had been a construction foreman whose biggest problem was a broken elevator, and now he was sitting in a CEO's office preparing to testify before a corporate board about a conspiracy that had swallowed his entire life. Okay, he said. The board members arrived between 8:30 and 8:55. Ethan watched them from the hallway as they filed into the main conference room. 7 people in expensive clothes with expensive haircuts, carrying expensive bags, each of them radiating the particular blend of importance and irritation that came from being summoned to an emergency meeting on a Sunday morning. There were 4 men and 3 women, The oldest was maybe 70, a white-haired man with a cane who moved slowly but whose eyes were sharp and alert. The youngest was a woman in her 40s who kept checking her phone. At 8:57, Damian Cross arrived. Ethan saw him from 30 feet away, standing in the hallway near the elevator bank where Victoria had positioned him deliberately. She'd wanted Damian to see Ethan before the meeting started. She'd wanted him to know that the man he'd framed was in the building, was not hiding, was not afraid, or at least was doing a passable job of pretending not to be. Damian walked down the hallway in a navy suit with a pale blue tie. He carried a leather portfolio under one arm. His posture was relaxed, his expression pleasant, the face of a man who had come to a meeting he expected to control. He glanced at Ethan as he passed, and this time the look was different from the one at the project meeting 4 days earlier. This time there was something behind the polish. A flicker, brief and cold, like a light going on and off in a window. He knows, Ethan thought. He knows we have something, and he's calculating. Damian walked into the conference room without a word. Ethan stayed in the hallway, breathing. Victoria appeared beside him. Ready? No? Good. People who say they're ready for things like this are either lying or not paying attention. She paused. You go in after Naomi presents. I'll cue you. At 9 a.m., Victoria Sterling opened the emergency board meeting of Sterling Dynamics. Ethan wasn't in the room for the first part. He sat in Victoria's office down the hall with the door open, listening to the muffled sounds of voices through the walls. He couldn't hear specific words, but he could hear tone. Victoria's voice, steady and authoritative. Then Naomi's, quicker, more technical. Then the murmur of board members asking questions. 20 minutes in, the tone changed. Something shifted. The murmur became sharper, more urgent. Someone raised their voice, not yelling, but the kind of forceful speaking that happens when people in suits realize they're hearing something that threatens their money. Then a voice he hadn't heard clearly before. Deeper, controlled, with the measured cadence of someone used to performing calm. Damian. He was responding, defending, redirecting. Ethan couldn't hear the words, but he could hear the rhythm, the practiced ease of a man who had prepared for this possibility, who had contingencies for his contingencies, who had spent years learning how to stand in front of powerful people and make them believe whatever he needed them to believe. Ethan's phone buzzed. Victoria. Now. He stood up, straightened his tie, walked down the hallway to the conference room door and opened it. 12 faces turned toward him. 7 board members around the long table. Victoria at the head. Naomi standing beside a projection screen that displayed a timeline of transactions in red and green. And Damian Cross, seated halfway down the table, his portfolio open in front of him, his expression perfectly composed. This is Ethan Cole, Victoria said. He's not an employee of this company. He's not a consultant, a contractor, or a financial professional. He's a construction foreman and a single father. And until 12 days ago, he had never heard of Sterling Dynamics, the Meridian Bridge Project, or anyone in this room. And yet his name appears on 17 fraudulent financial documents authorizing the transfer of $23.8 million from this company's accounts. Mr. Cole, please tell the board what has happened to you. Ethan looked at the faces around the table. He looked at the white-haired man with the cane, who was watching him with eyes that missed nothing. He looked at the woman who'd been checking her phone, who had stopped checking it. He looked at Damian Cross, who was looking back at him with an expression that could have been curiosity or contempt or both. And then he talked. He didn't use notes. He didn't have a prepared statement. He just started at the beginning. The morning he woke up with Victoria in his bed, the fog in his head, the pregnancy test in Claire's drawer that had nothing to do with any of this but had cracked something open inside him that made all the other cracks worse. He told them about the text message threatening Lily. He pulled up his phone and read it aloud, and his voice shook slightly on the word daughter, and he didn't try to hide it because hiding it would have been a lie, and he was done with lies. He told them about the forged signature, about Marcus Webb, about the man watching his building from across the street. He told them about Mrs. Huang and her deadbolt and her cat, and about how a 73-year-old woman with arthritic hands had become his daughter's primary line of defense because he couldn't afford anything better. And the man who was stealing millions from this company had decided that a 6-year-old girl was acceptable collateral. The room was silent. Not the polite silence of people waiting their turn to speak, the heavy silence of people who were hearing something they couldn't unhear. "I don't know anyone in this room," Ethan said. "I don't know how corporate boards work. I don't know about offshore accounts or shell companies or data migrations. What I know is this. Someone used my name to steal your money, someone put a stranger in my bed to make me look complicit, and someone told me to keep my daughter close because they were watching. I'm here because I have nothing left to lose except her, and I will not lose her. Not to this. Not to him." He didn't point at Damien. He didn't need to. The white-haired board member spoke first. His name was Arthur Kessler, and his voice had the dry, precise quality of someone who had spent 50 years in boardrooms and had heard every kind of excuse and explanation and justification the human mind could produce. "Mr. Cross," Kessler said, "would you like to respond?" Damien stood up. He buttoned his jacket with one hand, a small, deliberate gesture that Ethan recognized as performance, the physical equivalent of clearing one's throat before a speech. "I appreciate Mr. Cole's passion," Damien said. His voice was smooth, modulated, the voice of a man who had rehearsed sincerity until it was indistinguishable from the real thing. "But what we're seeing here is a carefully constructed narrative designed to deflect attention from the real question, which is how this company's financial controls failed so catastrophically. Ms. Sterling has been CEO for 4 years. These alleged irregularities occurred on her watch. If there are fraudulent transactions in our system, the first person the board should be looking at is the person who is responsible for preventing them." It was elegant. Ethan had to admit that. In 30 seconds, Damien had redirected the entire conversation from himself to Victoria, from the evidence to the systems, from the crime to the oversight. It was the move of a man who understood that, in a boardroom, the person who controls the frame controls the outcome. Victoria didn't flinch. She stood at the head of the table and let Damien finish, and then she said, "Naomi." Naomi stepped forward. She connected one of the portable hard drives to the conference room's display system, and the projection screen filled with data. Login records, IP addresses, timestamps, transaction codes. "These are the server logs from Sterling Dynamics' backup system," Naomi said. "Every transaction flagged in my financial analysis was initiated from one workstation using one set of network credentials. Workstation ID, EXEC-DC-4. Network user, D.Cross. The IP address is static, assigned to the office of the Senior Vice President of Infrastructure Development. The timestamps correspond to Mr. Cross's badge-in and badge-out records on each relevant date." She switched to the next screen. "This is a comparison of the authorization signatures on the fraudulent Greystone invoices with Mr. Cole's actual signature on his state contractor's license. A first-year forensics student could identify the discrepancies. The loop on the E is wrong. The tail on the C is too long. Whoever forged this did a reasonable job, but they didn't do a good enough one." Next screen. "These are the corporate formation documents for Greystone Civil Construction. The registered agent is a law firm in Wilmington called Pierce & Harlow. The sole partner of Pierce & Harlow is a man named Gerald Price, who also happens to be the personal attorney of Damien Cross, and who was in this building at 1:18 this morning attempting to access the sub-basement where these backup records are stored." The room went very quiet. Damien's face didn't change. That was the thing Ethan would remember later. Not the evidence, not the timestamps, not the signatures, but Damien's face. It stayed composed. The mask held. Even as every piece of his architecture was being disassembled in front of the people he had spent years cultivating and manipulating, his expression remained that of a man who believed he could still talk his way out of anything. "This is absurd," Damien said. "These records could have been fabricated. Miss Tran works directly for Victoria. She has every incentive to manufacture evidence. The backup server logs are immutable," Naomi said. She wasn't looking at Damien. She was looking at Kessler. "They're stored on a write-once system that timestamps every entry at the hardware level. You can't alter them without replacing the physical drives, and the drives have chain-of-custody seals that haven't been broken. I can have them independently verified by a third-party forensic firm within 24 hours. Kessler turned to Damien. "Do you have a response to that, Mr. Cross?" Damien didn't answer immediately. He looked around the table, making eye contact with each board member in turn, and Ethan watched him searching for an ally, a sympathetic face, a crack he could exploit. He didn't find one. "I want my attorney present before I say anything further," Damien said. "Your attorney," Victoria said, "was in my building at 1 in the morning trying to destroy the evidence that just put you in this chair. I don't think he's going to be much help." Kessler raised his hand. The room stilled. "The board will convene an executive session to review the evidence presented today. Mr. Cross, your access to all company systems, facilities, and personnel is suspended effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. The board will refer this matter to federal investigators for further review." Damien stood there for a moment, just a moment, and in that moment Ethan saw the mask slip. Not much. A tightening around the mouth, a slight narrowing of the eyes, the briefest flash of something raw and furious beneath the surface. Then it was gone, and Damien picked up his portfolio and walked out of the room without looking at anyone, flanked by 2 security officers who had appeared at the door. The room exhaled. Ethan sat down in the nearest empty chair because his legs had decided they were done holding him up. His hands were trembling. His shirt was damp with sweat under the funeral suit. He felt like he'd been carrying something enormously heavy for 12 days and had just set it down, and his body didn't know how to be without the weight yet. Victoria walked over to him. She didn't sit down. She stood beside his chair and put her hand on his shoulder, briefly, the way you touch someone when you want them to know you're there, but you don't have the words for why. "It's over," she said. "Is it?" "The board will refer it to the FBI. Damien's accounts will be frozen by tomorrow. His access is already revoked. Gerald Price will be disbarred. The forensic audit will take months, but the outcome is certain." Ethan looked up at her. "And me? My name on those documents?" "Naomi's forensic analysis proves the signatures are forged. The backup logs prove you had no access to any Sterling system ever. You were never a suspect, Ethan. You were a decoy, and now you're a witness." He nodded. He wanted to feel relief. He could feel it trying to arrive, the way weather approaches from a distance, visible on the horizon, but not yet overhead. It would come. Just not yet. Naomi appeared beside them, clutching her laptop like a security blanket. She looked exhausted and slightly manic, the way people look when they've been running on adrenaline and caffeine for too long and the crash is approaching its speed. "The board wants the forensic firm engaged by Monday," she said. "Kessler wants a full briefing, and I need to sleep for approximately 47 hours. "You can sleep when the audit is complete," Victoria said. "That's what you said about the backup recovery." "And you did that beautifully." Naomi looked at Ethan. Something passed between them, not friendship exactly, but the kind of recognition that happens between people who have survived something together, a shared foxhole, a common scar. "Go get your daughter," Naomi said. "She's probably wondering where you are." Ethan stood up. He shook Naomi's hand. He shook Victoria's hand. And then, because he didn't know what else to do, he walked out of the conference room and took the silent elevator down 32 floors and walked through the empty lobby and out into the November morning, where the air was cold and sharp and tasted like rain. He sat in his truck for 5 minutes. He put his hands on the steering wheel and gripped it until his knuckles went white and then released. He did this 3 times. Then he started the engine and drove to Mrs. Huang's apartment to pick up his daughter. Lily was sitting on Mrs. Huang's kitchen floor when Ethan walked in, drawing a picture of something that was either a cat or a very round dog. She looked up and smiled, and the smile hit him like sunlight after weeks of rain. Sudden, warm, almost painful in its simplicity. "Daddy, look, I drew Mrs. Huang's cat. That's a great cat, Bug. His name is General Whiskers. The cat's name is Bao," Mrs. Huang said from the stove, where she was stirring a pot of congee. "She renamed him this morning. He doesn't seem to mind." Ethan knelt down and picked Lily up. She wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her face against his shoulder, and he held her there for a long time. Too long, probably, long enough that she squirmed and said, "Daddy, you're squishing me." But he didn't care. He held on. He breathed her in, shampoo and crayons and the faint sweetness of whatever Mrs. Huang had given her for breakfast, and he felt the distance between where he'd been an hour ago and where he was now collapse into something manageable, something survivable. "Thank you," he said to Mrs. Huang, still holding Lily. For everything. Mrs. Huang looked at him over the rim of her teacup. You look different, she said. Different how? Less like a man trying to hold up a building by himself. Ethan almost laughed. Almost. Maybe the building got lighter. Or maybe you found someone to help you carry it. He took Lily home. She talked the entire way up the stairs, about General Whiskers and the fish movie, and how Mrs. Huang had taught her to fold a dumpling wrapper, but hers kept opening and the filling fell out, and Mrs. Huang said that was okay because the first 100 dumplings are always ugly. Ethan listened to every word. He carried her up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was still broken and she was tired, and he unlocked the apartment door and set her down and watched her run to her room to check on Waddles, who was right where she'd left him. He's okay, she shouted from her room. He didn't move at all. Penguins are very patient, Ethan said. He stood in the kitchen. The apartment was the same, small, cluttered, the spaghetti pot still in the sink from a week ago, which was disgusting but somehow comforting in its familiarity. The laptop Naomi had sent was still on the table, closed now, the security feeds dark. The funeral suit jacket was draped over a chair. Claire's photo was still on the nightstand in the bedroom, and somewhere in the drawer beneath it was a pregnancy test with a date that didn't make sense. He made lunch, peanut butter and jelly for Lily, the way she liked it, the jelly on top, the peanut butter on the bottom, cut diagonally because she insisted triangles tasted better than rectangles, and no amount of logic could convince her otherwise. He made himself a sandwich too, but only ate half of it. His stomach was still wound tight from the morning, the aftershock of standing in front of a room full of strangers and peeling himself open. His phone buzzed at 2 p.m. Victoria. The FBI field office has opened a preliminary investigation. They're sending agents to interview Naomi and the board members tomorrow. They'll want to talk to you too. Okay? I've arranged for my legal team to represent you at no cost. You'll have an attorney present during any federal interview. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. I want to. You were pulled into this because someone used your name without your knowledge. The least I can do is make sure you have proper representation while the system sorts itself out. Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter. Through the doorway, he could see Lily on the living room floor, arranging Waddles and 3 other stuffed animals in what appeared to be a classroom, lecturing them on something with great seriousness. Victoria. Yes. What happens to us? There was a pause. Not long, but he heard it, the small space between the question and the answer where everything unsaid lived. What do you mean? She asked, and her voice was careful in a way it hadn't been before. Not guarded exactly, but aware, like someone stepping onto ground they weren't sure could hold their weight. I mean, after the investigation, after the lawyers and the audits and the interviews, you go back to running your company. I go back to pulling cable on construction sites. We just go back. Is that what you want? It was a dangerous question. Ethan knew it was dangerous because he didn't have a safe answer. 2 weeks ago, he hadn't known Victoria Sterling existed. She was from a world so far from his that the distance couldn't be measured in miles. It was measured in tax brackets and security teams and buildings with silent elevators. She was a billionaire CEO who ate at restaurants he couldn't afford to park near. He was a widower with a broken elevator and a freezer full of chicken nuggets. The gap between them was so wide it should have been funny, and it wasn't. But she'd stood between Naomi and Gerald Price in a concrete hallway at 1 a.m. She'd briefed her lawyers on his custody rights before he'd asked. She'd put her hand on his shoulder after the board meeting, briefly, barely. And it had been the first time anyone had touched him with kindness since Claire died. I don't know what I want, Ethan said. I know what doesn't make sense. Most important things don't make sense. That's not a reason to walk away from them. Victoria, you live in a penthouse. I live in a building where the elevator's been broken since March. I'm aware of your elevator situation. I've read the building inspection reports. Of course you have. Ethan. Her voice changed again. The CEO layer peeled back and what was underneath was quieter, less certain. The voice of a woman who spent her professional life commanding rooms and her personal life alone. I'm not good at this. I'm not good at saying what I feel because I've spent 30 years making sure what I feel doesn't interfere with what I need to do. I run a company with 11,000 employees. I manage a board of directors, a legal department, and a public reputation. I can negotiate a 9-figure contract in 4 languages. And right now, talking to you on the phone about something that has nothing to do with business, I'm more nervous than I've been in any boardroom in my life. Ethan closed his eyes. He listened to her breathe on the other end of the line, and he thought about Claire, about the way she used to laugh when he said something accidentally funny, about the way she'd press her cold feet against his legs in bed and claim she had no idea what he was talking about. He thought about the pregnancy test and the date that didn't make sense, and the 14 months of grief that had turned him into a man who defined himself entirely by what he'd lost. He didn't want to be that man anymore. That was the truth. Not because the grief wasn't real. It was, it always would be. But because living inside it had become a way of hiding, and hiding had become a way of not having to risk anything, and not risking anything had become a way of slowly disappearing. "Let's not figure it out right now," he said. "Let's just not walk away from it." "I can do that," she said. "Okay." "Okay?" But there was a beat of silence that was different from all the other silences between them. Lighter, more open. The kind of silence that exists between people who have agreed to leave a door open without knowing yet what's on the other side. "I have one more thing I need to deal with," Ethan said. "Something that's been sitting in my wife's drawer since before any of this started. The pregnancy test." He blinked. "How do you know about that?" "You mentioned it in the board meeting. You said you found it dated 3 weeks after her death. You said it cracked something open inside you." Had he said that? He hadn't planned to. He didn't remember deciding to include it. But standing in front of those 7 strangers, the words had come out of someplace deeper than strategy, deeper than persuasion. They'd come from the same place where he kept everything about Claire that he was afraid to look at directly. "Yeah," he said. "I need to deal with it." "Do you want help?" "No, this one's mine." That evening, after Lily was in bed, Ethan sat on the edge of his mattress and opened Claire's drawer. He took out the pregnancy test and held it in his hands, feeling the weight of it. Not the physical weight, which was nothing, just plastic and chemistry, but the other weight. The weight of unanswered questions and unfinished conversations and the terrible, ordinary cruelty of dying before you're ready. He looked at the date, November 12th, written in Claire's handwriting, in blue ink, 23 days after her death. He turned the box over. On the back, beneath the manufacturer's instructions, Claire had written something else. Small, squeezed into the margin, easy to miss. He'd missed it the first time. He'd been too rattled to look closely, too shaken by the date and the positive result to examine the box any further. It said, "For Ethan, when you're ready." He stared at those 4 words for a long time. When you're ready. Not an accusation. Not a secret kept from malice. An act of mercy. She had known she was pregnant, and she had known something else too. Something about her health, maybe. Something about the risks. Something about the odds. She had taken the test and written the date and tucked it away in the drawer where she kept her most personal things. And she had written those 4 words because she knew him. She knew he would find it eventually, and she wanted him to find it when he could handle it rather than when she forced it on him. The date wasn't impossible. It was aspirational. She had written November 12th because that was when she'd planned to tell him. A Saturday. Their anniversary weekend. She'd been going to tell him over dinner probably, or maybe in bed, or maybe in the kitchen while he was making coffee. The way she told him most important things, casually, offhandedly, as if the enormity of the news needed to be balanced by the mundanity of the setting. But she'd died on October 20th, 3 weeks before the date on the box. And the pregnancy, whatever it had been, however far along, however possible, or complicated, or beautiful, had died with her, and she'd never had the chance to say the words she'd been saving. Ethan put the test down. He pressed his palms against his eyes. He breathed in, held it, let it go. The grief came, not in a wave, but in a slow, deep current, the kind that pulls at your ankles before you realize how strong it is. He let it pull. He didn't fight it. He'd spent 14 months fighting it, bracing against it, building walls around it, and all that effort had done was make him rigid and brittle, a man made of stone who couldn't bend without breaking. So he broke. Quietly, sitting on the edge of his bed, in a small apartment in a building with a broken elevator, A man who had spent 2 weeks surviving conspiracy and blackmail and corporate warfare, who had stood in front of a boardroom full of strangers and told them his story without flinching, fell apart over 4 words written in his dead wife's handwriting. It lasted maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15. He didn't time it. When it was over, he felt different. Not healed. That word was too clean, too complete, too much like a thing that happened all at once. He felt cracked open. He felt like something had been released, some pressure that had been building behind a dam he hadn't known he was maintaining, and now the dam had a hole in it, and the water was flowing, and it was messy, and it was ugly, and it was necessary. He put the pregnancy test in a small wooden box on his dresser, the box where he kept his wedding ring and Claire's hospital bracelet from when Lily was born, and a folded piece of paper with Lily's first attempt at writing her own name, the L too tall and the Y leaning sideways like it was tired. He put the test beside these things because it belonged with them. It was part of the story. Not the whole story, and not the end of it, but a chapter that needed to be acknowledged before he could write the next one. He closed the box. He went to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water and drank it standing at the counter, the way he always did, gripping the edge with his free hand. Through the window, he could see the city skyline, the distant lights of buildings he'd never been inside, the faint glow of Sterling Dynamics' 32 stories of glass reflecting the night sky. His phone buzzed. Naomi. FBI confirmed Damien's offshore account. $7.3 million in the Caymans, $4.1 in Luxembourg, the rest distributed across 3 crypto wallets. They're freezing everything tomorrow. Ethan typed back. Good. Also, Gerald Price turned himself in this afternoon. He's cooperating. Apparently self-interest really is the only reliable constant in corporate law. Victoria called that one. Victoria calls most things. Don't tell her I said that. Ethan almost smiled. He set the phone down and looked at the kitchen. The dirty pot, the cereal box Lily had left open, the drawings on the fridge, the cracks in the ceiling he kept meaning to fix. It was a small life. It had always been a small life. And for the first time in a long time, that didn't feel like a failure. He slept that night. Not well, not deeply, but he slept. And he didn't dream about hallways or security cameras or forged signatures. He dreamed about penguins, which was either Lily's influence or his subconscious choosing absurdity over trauma, and either way, he'd take it. The next 3 weeks moved quickly. The FBI investigation expanded into a full federal case. 2 additional executives at Sterling Dynamics were implicated, people who had either known about Damien's scheme and stayed silent or had actively helped facilitate it in exchange for kickbacks. Marcus Webb was located in Costa Rica and extradited. Gerald Price's cooperation led to the recovery of $11.4 million of the stolen $23.8, with the remainder expected to be traced through the cryptocurrency wallets within months. Ethan's name was formally cleared. The forensic analysis confirmed that every signature attributed to him was forged, and the FBI's statement specifically identified him as a victim of identity theft and corporate fraud. His legal representation, courtesy of Victoria's firm, handled everything. He signed documents. He gave 2 depositions. He answered questions from federal agents who were professional and thorough and treated him with a respect that surprised him because he'd expected suspicion and instead found something closer to admiration. You walked into a boardroom with no preparation and no protection and told the truth in front of a man who was trying to destroy you, the lead agent told him. That takes guts. I had a 6-year-old to protect, Ethan said. That's not guts, that's math. Naomi was promoted. Victoria announced it publicly, framing it as recognition of extraordinary service to the integrity of this company, which was corporate language for she risked her career to save us all, and we owe her more than a title. Naomi accepted the promotion with characteristic understatement. I'm just glad I don't have to sneak into any more sub-basements, she told Ethan over the phone. My knees are too old for espionage. You're 35. Espionage years are like dog years. I'm basically 112. The man who had been watching Ethan's building was identified as a private investigator hired by Price. He had been surveilling Ethan for 3 weeks before the night Victoria appeared in his bed. He had followed Lily to school. He had photographed Mrs. Huang. He had compiled a file on Ethan's daily routine, pickup times, work schedule, grocery trips, and delivered it to Damien's office in a sealed envelope. The investigator cooperated with the FBI in exchange for immunity and seemed genuinely horrified when he learned that his surveillance reports had been used to threaten a child. "I thought it was a custody case," he told the agents. "Some rich guy tracking his ex-wife's new boyfriend." That's what Price said. "I didn't know about the kid." Ethan didn't forgive him. He didn't need to. Forgiveness was for people who had earned it, and a man who had followed a 6-year-old to school because someone told him to hadn't earned anything. But the threat was gone. That was what mattered. The watcher was gone, the text messages had stopped, and Lily went to school every morning without anyone tracking her movements. The lock on the apartment door was just a lock again, not a barricade. The kitchen knife went back in the drawer where it belonged. On a Thursday evening in early December, 3 weeks after the board meeting, Victoria came to Ethan's apartment for the first time since the morning she'd left through the back stairs. She knocked. He opened the door. She was holding a brown paper bag from the Vietnamese restaurant on the corner and wearing jeans and a sweater, which was so far from the black suits and silk blouses he'd seen her in that she almost looked like a different person. Almost, but not quite. Her posture was still impeccable. Her eyes were still sharp. She was still Victoria Sterling, CEO, billionaire, the most important person in most rooms. She was just also a woman standing in his doorway holding takeout. "I brought pho," she said. "I can see that. I didn't know what Lily liked, so I got chicken for her and beef for us." "She likes chicken," I guessed. He stepped aside. She walked in. She looked around the apartment, the small kitchen, the living room with the secondhand couch, the drawings on the fridge, the hallway leading to the bedrooms. She didn't comment on any of it. She didn't compare it to whatever penthouse or townhouse she lived in. She just set the bag on the kitchen table and started unpacking containers with the same efficiency she brought to everything. Lily appeared from her room, attracted by the smell of soup. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at Victoria with the particular intensity of a child encountering a new person in their territory. "Who are you?" Lily asked. Victoria looked at her. And something happened on Victoria's face that Ethan had never seen before. A softening, a slight crack in the composure, as if the sight of a 6-year-old in penguin pajamas had bypassed every defense she'd spent 30 years building. "I'm Victoria," she said. "I'm a friend of your dad's." Lily considered this. "Do you like penguins?" "I've never thought about it." "You should think about it. Penguins are the best." "Why?" "Because they waddle, and they take care of their babies in the cold. The daddy penguin holds the egg on his feet for months and months so it doesn't freeze. Daddy told me that." Victoria looked at Ethan. He looked at the floor because the metaphor was so obvious, it was almost embarrassing, and Lily had delivered it with the devastating sincerity that only a 6-year-old could manage. "That's pretty impressive," Victoria said to Lily. "Daddy said we could go see real penguins at the aquarium. Can you come?" "Lily," Ethan said, "Victoria's very busy." "I'd like that," Victoria said. She said it quickly, without hesitation, and when she looked at Ethan, there was something in her expression that he recognized because he'd felt it in himself. The look of a person who has been offered something simple and kind and is afraid to want it. They ate dinner at the kitchen table. Lily talked about penguins and General Whiskers and the boy named Jackson who had now graduated from eating glue to eating sand, which she considered a lateral move at best. Victoria listened with genuine attention, asking follow-up questions that made Lily light up because children know when an adult is really listening and when they're just waiting for the conversation to be over. After dinner, Ethan put Lily to bed. 2 chapters of the Treehouse book, waddles tucked under her arm, covers pulled up to her chin. The door left open exactly 3 inches. "Daddy?" "Yeah, Bug." "I like Victoria." "Yeah?" "She asks good questions." "She does." "Is she going to come back?" Ethan looked at his daughter, this small person who had lost her mother at 4 and had never once stopped trusting that the world would give her someone else to love. Not a replacement, not a substitute, just someone new, someone different, someone who asked good questions and ate pho at a kitchen table and didn't mind being told she should think about penguins. "I think so," Ethan said. "Good." He turned off the light. He walked back to the kitchen where Victoria was washing dishes. Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Dynamics, was standing at his sink in a sweater with her sleeves rolled up, washing his daughter's chicken pho bowl, and the image was so incongruous that Ethan stopped in the doorway and just watched her for a moment. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know." She didn't stop. "You have people who do this for you. I have people who do a lot of things for me. That doesn't mean I've forgotten how." She rinsed the bowl and set it in the dish rack and turned to face him, drying her hands on a towel that had a coffee stain on it. "She's remarkable. She's a mess. She smuggles crayons home in her pockets, and she renamed a 73-year-old woman's cat, and she thinks triangular sandwiches taste better than rectangular ones." "That's what I mean. She's remarkable." They stood in the kitchen looking at each other, and the distance between their lives, the tax brackets and the security teams and the silent elevators, was still there, and it would always be there. And it didn't matter. It didn't matter because the distance between two people is not measured in money or status or square footage. It's measured in what they're willing to risk for each other. And Ethan and Victoria had already risked everything. "I still have questions about Claire," Ethan said, "about the pregnancy, about why she didn't tell me. I know. I might not ever get answers. Some questions are like that. Does that bother you?" Victoria folded the towel and set it on the counter. She did it carefully, precisely, the way she did everything. "My mother died when I was 12, she said. She left a note that said she'd explain everything later, but she never got the chance. I spent 20 years trying to decode that note. I analyzed every word. I consulted handwriting experts. I built entire theories about what she meant. And then one day I realized that the note wasn't a puzzle to be solved. It was a goodbye that came too soon. And the only thing I could do with it was carry it with me and keep going." It was the most personal thing she had ever told him. He could see what it cost her. The way her jaw tightened, the way she pressed her hands flat against the counter, the small, controlled effort of someone who was allowing herself to be seen. "I'm sorry," Ethan said. "Don't be sorry. Be here. That's what I needed then. And it's what I think you need now. Someone who stays." Ethan crossed the kitchen. He stood in front of her, close enough to see the faint lines around her eyes and the barely visible scar above her left eyebrow that he'd never noticed before. She looked up at him, and the CEO was gone. The billionaire was gone. The woman who negotiated 9-figure contracts in 4 languages was gone, and what was left was just a person, tired, brave, imperfect, human, standing in a small kitchen in a building with a broken elevator, willing to be known. He took her hand. She let him. They stood like that for a while, not talking, not needing to. The apartment was quiet around them. Lily breathing down the hall, the refrigerator humming, the distant sounds of the city filtering through windows that didn't seal properly. It wasn't a grand moment. It wasn't cinematic. It was 2 people in a kitchen at 9 p.m. on a Thursday, holding hands, learning what it felt like to be close to someone again after years of holding the world at arm's length. "I should go," Victoria said eventually. "Early meeting tomorrow." "On a Friday?" "International client, Singapore. They're 14 hours ahead and very punctual." "Will you come back?" "Lily invited me to see the penguins. I take invitations from 6-year-olds very seriously." "Saturday?" "Saturday." He walked her to the door. She stopped in the hallway and looked back at him, and there was something in her face that was new. Not happiness, exactly, because happiness was too simple a word for what had grown between 2 people who had met under the worst possible circumstances and somehow built something from the wreckage. It was more like possibility. The sense that the future was no longer something to endure, but something to build. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Victoria." She walked down the stairs because the elevator was still broken, and he listened to her footsteps recede, steady, confident, deliberate. And then the building was quiet again, and he was alone in his apartment, and for the first time in 14 months, alone didn't feel like the same thing as lonely. He went to the bedroom, opened the small wooden box on the dresser, looked at Claire's hospital bracelet, his wedding ring, Lily's crooked signature, the pregnancy test, all the artifacts of a life that had ended too soon in a love that had been real and complicated and imperfect and cut short. He didn't close the box. He left it open on the dresser, not as a shrine, but as a reminder that the past was allowed to exist alongside the present, that moving forward didn't mean leaving behind, that carrying someone's memory and reaching for someone new were not contradictions, but the most human thing a person could do. The next morning, Ethan woke up to Lily standing beside his bed, fully dressed, holding Waddles. "Daddy? What time is it?" "It's morning." "That's not a time, Bug. It's penguin time." "Saturday, Lily. Penguins on Saturday." "Can Victoria come?" She already said yes. Lily grinned. She climbed onto the bed and sat cross-legged beside him, Waddles in her lap, and she said, "Daddy, I think the penguins are going to like Victoria." "Why do you think that?" "Because she listened when I talked. Penguins like good listeners." Ethan looked at his daughter. He thought about everything that had happened in the last month. The conspiracy, the blackmail, the forged documents, the threats, the midnight operation, the boardroom. He thought about Damian Cross in a federal holding facility, and Marcus Webb in an extradition hearing, and Gerald Price negotiating his cooperation agreement. He thought about Naomi in her new office with her coffee-stained sleeves and her bad knees. He thought about Mrs. Huang and her dumplings and her cat with 2 names. And he thought about Victoria, walking down 3 flights of stairs in a building with a broken elevator, going home to a penthouse that was probably immaculate and empty and quiet. A woman who had everything and nothing, who had spent her life building an empire and forgotten to build a home, who had found something unexpected in the least likely place. A small apartment, a faux dinner, a 6-year-old in penguin pajamas who asked good questions. "Hey, Bug," Ethan said. "Yeah? I love you." "I know, Daddy. I love you too. Can we have pancakes?" He made pancakes. He burned 2 of them, which was par for the course. Lily ate them anyway, drenched in syrup, talking about penguins and Victoria and the aquarium and whether penguins ate pancakes too, which Ethan said he doubted, but Lily argued was possible because they hadn't tried. After breakfast, he fixed the wobbling blade on the ceiling fan. It took him 15 minutes and a screwdriver he'd been looking for since June. The fan spun smoothly for the first time in 2 years, and the bedroom was quiet in a way it hadn't been before. No rattle, no uneven rhythm, just the soft, steady movement of air through a room where a man had once lain awake staring at the ceiling and wondering how he was going to survive. He didn't wonder that anymore. Ethan Cole was 32 years old. He was a construction foreman and a single father. He lived in a building with a broken elevator and a 73-year-old neighbor who made the best dumplings in the city. His wife was dead, and his heart was cracked, and his hands were rough from work, and his suit was the one he'd bought for a funeral, and his daughter thought triangular sandwiches tasted better than rectangular ones. And she was probably right about that, the way she was probably right about most things. He was not healed. He was not finished. He was not the man he'd been before Claire died, and he would never be that man again. And that was okay. That was the thing nobody tells you about loss, that it doesn't end with a resolution or a lesson or a tidy conclusion. It just becomes part of you, the way a scar becomes part of your skin. You don't forget the wound. You don't pretend it didn't happen. You just learn to live with the mark it left, and you keep going. And sometimes, if you're lucky, if you're willing, if you let people in instead of keeping them out, you find that the scar doesn't make you weaker. It makes you someone who survived. Saturday came. Ethan packed Lily's backpack with snacks and a water bottle and an extra pair of socks because she always managed to get her feet wet at the aquarium. He zipped up her coat and tied her shoes and handed her Waddles, who was making the trip because Lily said he needed to meet his own kind. At 10 a.m., Victoria pulled up to the building in a car that cost more than Ethan's annual salary. She got out wearing jeans and sneakers and a jacket that was probably designer but looked like something a normal person would wear, and Lily ran down the front steps and grabbed her hand without asking and said, "The penguins are waiting." Victoria looked at Ethan over the top of Lily's head. He looked back at her. And between them, above the small, fierce grip of a 6-year-old girl who had decided that this person belonged in her life, something passed that didn't need words. An understanding, a beginning, a promise made not in a boardroom or a hallway or a crisis, but on the front steps of a building with a broken elevator, in the ordinary, unremarkable light of a Saturday morning where the future was not guaranteed and the past was not forgotten and the present was exactly enough. "Let's go see the penguins," Ethan said. And they did.